Good morning. Welcome to our midweek session. We're on Wednesday already. These weeks seem to be flying past. Hashtag LDeduchat, Leadership Development in Education online. And we have a brilliant, absolutely brilliant session. It's somebody that I've worked with for a while, Chris Nicholls, looking at all areas of coaching and what coaching actually is and how do we develop that culture within our schools and also the impact of it. Twitter, don't forget to go over there and follow us at Chiltern TSA, at Chiltern TSA, where you'll find information regarding this session and all others. Make sure that you engage. Make sure you engage with us on here. Make sure you engage with us on Twitter. Make sure you give us feedback. Your input, your engagement and your feedback is so valued. It's what's kept us going. So make sure you do that during this session and every session that you do attend. Without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into Chris's session.
Hello and welcome to my session on using coaching to develop staff. My name's Chris Nicholls. I taught for around 25 years in a wide range of different schools, including international schools. And following that, I went on to join the school improvement team in Bedford. And I was there for 4 years, supporting a range of different schools. And from there, I went on to become vice principal of Luton Sixth Form College. And following that, I was the principal for 6 years. And I retired nearly 2 years ago. I guess during my formal career, I had plenty of opportunities to observe different leaders in different settings. And I had plenty of time to reflect on my own leadership, how I could improve it, but also how I could help others. And that was particularly true in school improvement, where, of course, it was an important part of my job, supporting head teachers of then lower schools, middle schools, upper schools, and special schools. I guess I learned quite a lot about how leadership works and how to support leaders. And I learned something really interesting, which is that in order to help somebody to be a better leader or to be more effective in the job they're doing, you don't have to be an expert in the job itself to help somebody. And as part of that, I learnt the power of a good question to help move somebody forward. And that's an important part of coaching, which I'll come back to a bit later. So when I finished my formal career, I decided to look into coaching more closely, and I started a formal qualification, which I started last autumn. And I think it's really important to emphasize that I am not promoting myself as a coach at this point. I'm not very far on the journey. I think I am improving, but I'm not there yet. But what I can do and do want to do today is to promote coaching itself, because I already know that it works. It's really effective. And I want to share that with you. And I think I'd also say, in some ways, I wish I'd known 20 years ago what I know now about coaching. So perhaps this is an opportunity for me to share with you something that perhaps you can implement now, maybe many years earlier in your career than I have been able to. So I thought I ought to start by showing my credentials as a teacher with some objectives for this session, which we will come back to at the end, just to check that I've actually met the objectives. I'm going to spend a bit of time on defining what I mean by coaching and what is, I suppose, generally understood to be pure coaching. It's important, I think, to understand precisely what it is. We'll definitely look at the impact of it, and then spend a little bit of time thinking about the kind of do's and don'ts, really, of introducing coaching into your own school, college, nursery, or whatever setting you happen to be working in. So, first of all, what is coaching? What is coaching in the sense that I'm using it? I think it suffers a little bit from being a word that everybody nods and smiles when they hear the word. If I say I'm doing coaching, people automatically know what that means, or at least they think they do. Sometimes I have the time, take the time and to explain exactly what I mean, what I'm doing, but very often, I accept the fact that they will have formed a view in their mind about what it is that'll probably be different from what I'm doing. I guess the idea that comes most readily to mind is sports, some kind of sports coaching, and that, as we'll see, is not what I'm talking about. Let's start with an idea. Is this coaching type of conversation that you might hear often in an educational organisation between one person and another, perhaps a more senior person with leadership responsibility? Is this coaching? Well, it's not coaching in the sense that I'm using the word. We would think of this as teaching, instructing. It's more like the idea of sports coaching, really, where it's somebody who knows how to do something, telling somebody else, this is what you need to do it well. So it's something that we'll often find leaders doing, but it's not coaching in the sense that I mean. How about this? Again, this is something that many people would think of as coaching, and indeed I would have done, a year or so back perhaps. But it's not, again, it's not coaching in the sense that I'm using the word. You can see here, it's more like advising and mentoring, sharing your experience, not this time telling them this is how you have to do it, but saying, have you thought about this? Why don't you try this? How about this one? Well, you can probably spot straight away, this is definitely not coaching. I don't think anybody would consider this to be coaching. This type of one-to-one discussion is what we think of as counselling or therapy. And it's certainly not coaching. So how about this one? So what else could you try? Well, it won't surprise you, I'm sure, to see that this is indeed the type of coaching. This is my definition of coaching here. It's about questioning, helping people to think about their options, to work out what's on that signpost, what are the options for themselves, deciding for themselves what their goals are and what they need to do. So the focus is entirely on the client and not on you as the coach. So this is coaching then, just asking questions, not giving people any answers. It's a bit counterintuitive when we think of helping people. We, particularly I think probably in education, our instinct is to help by telling people what to do or suggesting, this is a good idea, this worked for me, why don't you do it? But I really want to stress that this is not coaching, and those other things are helpful, but they will work in a different way. Coaching works in a quite distinctive way. Trust me, it does. So, brief recap on that then. Teaching, instructing, training, as leaders, whatever level, we do it all the time. That's part of the job. Advising and mentoring, we should be doing that all the time as well. We should be helping people to develop by passing on our wisdom and experience. Counselling, we really shouldn't be doing that unless we happen to be a trained counsellor. Beware of those kind of conversations. Part of the challenge of coaching is recognising where that boundary is and advising somebody at that point, well, you need to see a counsellor to talk about that. And sometimes as leaders in education, we have to do that. We have to recognise this is dangerous territory, but I advise you to speak to a counsellor. So coaching, in the sense that I mean, this process of questioning people to help them develop. Do we do this? Do we do this? Do we think we do this? Do we really do this? That's the kind of the question for you really at this point. So a brief description really of one of the most common models of coaching. There are alternatives, but this is the one most well known and is probably familiar to many of you. Briefly going through these then, the formation of the goal takes a bit of time. It's interesting, some people start off thinking that they know what they want to do or to achieve, but when you unpick that a bit, you realize that it's actually something else. In the first instance, it could be something else that they need to do and achieve, and you're helping them to see that. The gap is self-explanatory really, but that's an interesting part of the process. Sometimes I help people to do that by looking at somebody that's doing it well, or somebody who's in the position that they want to be, and say, well, what do they do well that you can do now, and do they do that you can't do? So it's helping them to work out the gap for themselves. Then you move on to listing the options. And this is quite challenging as a coach if you've got experience in the area that the client is working in, because the temptation is to jump in and say, well, how about that? Or no, that won't work. Or have you thought about this? But the discipline as a coach is to just keep saying, well, what else? What else could you do? What else could you try? And to resist that temptation to feed things in. And the idea here is that you get them to keep going with as many options as possible. And you're trying to really get them beyond a limited view. So you might ask questions like, well, if money was no object, what would you do? What could you do? If time was no object, what could you do? If you had superpowers, what could you do? You keep pushing and pushing, and you get a list of options, which will certainly include some things that are totally impossible. But in amongst all those will be some things that they could do and want to do. And that's where you move to with the way forward, the actions. And you get the client to kind of agree what they want to do. Now, that could be one action, it could be 5 actions, but it's their actions, it's not yours, they're not accountable to you. And the focus in coaching is very much on moving forward. Things might have gone wrong, but then you use that by asking, well, what did you learn from it? And how are you going to use that learning to move forward? So it's a kind of relentless forward motion idea in coaching. This is a kind of fundamental idea, really. And this is important too. I think as a coach, you need to recognize that you are helping people to move out of their comfort zone in many cases and into the learning zone, which is a little bit uncomfortable, by definition. But it's where the exciting stuff happens. If you're going to really move forward as a leader, then you do need to get into that slightly uncomfortable zone. And the coach is helping people into it. So, you need to understand there'll be a little bit of kind of creative tension. There'll be times when there are long pauses, when people are thinking very deeply, and you have to hold back from the temptation to prompt them or help because they're doing some serious thinking. And, there's that sort of slight tension that is necessary. So how does coaching actually help people? I want to share now some comments that people have given me in feedback, and then also show you some videos of people who have experienced coaching to see what they say. So looking at these comments here, a couple of things you might want to know. That digging deep is an important idea, that you're helping the client to really go a bit further than perhaps they have done before in their thinking. Allowing time for reflection and consideration is important. We don't have enough time. It's an incredibly demanding job working in education. We don't manage to make time for ourselves or for others. So this is what it does. It creates a bit of space and a bit of time for reflection. You'll notice there somebody mentioning going back into senior management roles. And on this next screen, somebody says that they're an NQT. And this is an important idea, I think, that coaching will help people at whatever stage of the career that they're at. I think that last comment there is in some ways the most powerful for me, because many people say this, that coaching increases their self-confidence and helps them to believe more in their own capabilities. And I think self-doubt is something that is familiar to many people in education. We talk sometimes about the impostor syndrome. It's a common experience. That it's common to hear people say, oh, well, I couldn't do that, that won't work, or, oh, no, that's too difficult, or that person won't help me, or I haven't got time for this, or, I'm not good enough, is fundamentally what they're saying. And coaching genuinely helps people to see themselves in a different way. So let's hear now from a few people who have experienced coaching.
Hi there, my name is Loretta Seaton. I'm currently an Assistant Director of English at a secondary school. One of the benefits of coaching for me has been really being able to have the time to reflect on my current experiences and be honest in my reflections and think about my next steps. Coaching has really enabled me to kind of hone down my ideas and my path and essentially make a decision. So as a result of having coaching sessions, I'm now taking on the role of Head of Year 7 in September.
My name is Zahira and I'm a maths teacher. I've had 2 coaching sessions so far, and in the short time, I found coaching to be an invaluable tool. My mindset has changed. The way I perceive or approach a situation has changed. I've learned to communicate more effectively and also contribute more towards the team. Coaching has empowered and developed me to be a better teacher, a better colleague, and most definitely a better leader.
Hello, my name is Vinette Hoffman-Jackson, and this year I was a participant in the BAME into Leadership program. One of the components was a coaching session with an allocated coach, and this year the coach was Chris Nicholls. Now, to be honest, when I went into the session, I went in thinking this is just going to be a tick box exercise, and then I'm just going to move on and complete the course. What I discovered was something completely different. By the end of the session, I had a complete map of the next step in my progression to leadership. I recognized my strengths and I matched them to specifications in terms of the role that I required. I also discovered or uncovered some weaknesses that I had, but what I liked especially with this session is that after they were uncovered, tangible steps or tangible recommendations were given in terms of what my next step should be in order to improve on these weaknesses. Chris also made sure there was a follow-up email just to keep me on track and just to make sure I'm monitoring my progress and holding myself accountable to making sure I achieve my goals. Would I recommend coaching? 100%. Thank you.
So there are a couple of things I'd like you to notice there. People say that they have discovered strengths or weaknesses, or that they have been revealed. And that's a really important idea. As a coach, you're not telling people, you're helping them to find out things about themselves that sometimes they didn't know. That's quite a powerful idea, and it tends then to lead quite naturally on to actions. The other thing I'd like you to notice is this idea of holding myself accountable for my actions and achieving my targets. And that's an important idea of coaching. It's not me as a coach saying, well, you need to do this. It's not the head of the organization or anybody else, the line manager. It's somebody deciding for themselves that that's what they want to do, and they're going to hold themselves accountable. That is quite powerful as a motivator. So I'd like to finish by spending a bit of time thinking about how you might introduce coaching at your own school, college, or whatever the setting. And it's just a few principles, really, that I think are really important. The first is to go back to understanding what we mean by coaching. So it's very easy to say, well, we're going to do some coaching. Then when you actually look at what's happening, it tends to be more about advice, guidance, or the other types of definition of coaching. It's not the pure form. And there's nothing wrong with giving advice and guidance and mentoring. But what I'm arguing here is that coaching has a kind of special power to do something different. So it's important that you're clear about that before you start. To do this properly, you need to identify, I would say, a small number of people and then really invest in them in terms of the time and the expertise that you're going to put to it. I've seen people say, well, we're going to coach our whole middle leadership team, or it's 20 people or so on, and have a very ambitious approach to this. I would suggest that that's not going to work. If you're going to do this properly, you are going to have to put in significant time, and also the expertise. One of the things that I would say absolutely about this is that it's not something you can just pick up from reading a book. That's what I thought. And then I discovered when I started the qualification that, however experienced I was at learning things by just reading things in books, there are specific skills that need to be learnt and practiced. So, I think what I'm saying is don't dabble with it. Do it properly. This is I think is important too. You hear people saying, oh, well, she's struggling a bit, he's struggling a bit, he needs some coaching. Well, he or she may, but that's really up to them to decide. You can't impose this on somebody as some kind of improvement kind of process. It has to be something that somebody chooses to do themselves. So you kind of can't have an external agenda about this when you choose who is going to do who's going to be involved in coaching. I think this follows from that, really. If you try to coach your own staff, you inevitably will have an agenda. And of course, it will be difficult for a confidential conversation. They may want to talk about the leadership team. They may even want to talk about you as the leader, if indeed you're leading the whole organization. So you need to give the person the time and space to have a confidential conversation. Now, if you're teamed up with other schools, if you're part of a trust, or you work with other schools and colleges, this isn't difficult. It takes a bit of organisation to agree this and to share the staff across, but it's very doable if you kind of approach it in that way. And a few final principles which I think are really important. Trust the process. So you need to say, I believe coaching works. You need to start with that, but you do need to be quite courageous as a leader to let somebody in your organisation be coached. You can't be expecting quick results. This is classic around sort of serious improvement. So often people expect things to happen overnight. It doesn't. It may or it may not. You may not be able to see very much happening. So if you go into this investing in somebody thinking, right, I'm going to expect things to be turned around, I can't wait to see huge improvement in the next few weeks or months, well, you may or you may not. You need to trust, though, that the process will produce results eventually. And this is linked to that idea. It's the client's agenda. It's not your agenda as a leader in the organization. You may want very much for them to develop in a particular way, but you have to trust that they know, working with the coach, they will work out what they need to do and they'll do it. And I guess the final reason why you might need courage is that this may lead to that person moving on to another school or college. That's always a tough one. My view on this always is that that's what professional development should mean. You should be prepared to lose staff. But I can tell you, I think with some confidence, that you'll definitely get your money's worth out of them while they are going through that development process. And before they leave you, they will have given a lot to you and they will have developed and improve their practice. So it'll all be worth it. To finish with, I'll just remind you of my objectives. I hope that you feel that I've achieved these objectives, but that's up to you to judge. I finally just want to say thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for your questions.
I just want to start off by saying that having worked with Chris and having known about Chris, he continuously undersells his abilities. I am always in awe of him and the work that he does, and so are the people that he's worked with. As much as he's on a learning journey himself regarding coaching, the wealth of expertise, knowledge, and just the lived experience of being in our sector in all different formats, I think in itself enables him to help people help themselves. So I think in terms of not having an agenda, not having a way that you dictate how you disseminate your guidance, your coaching, it does come from some lived experience, and Chris has a wealth of that. So just to remind you that on Twitter today we have at Chiltern TSA, we've got Ruth Golding, who is doing our Twitter takeover, and lots of comments. It's nice to see some of your pictures on there as well of you enjoying the session. Do go over there, use the hashtag LDeduchat so we can find your comments and find your thoughts on today's session. But without further ado, because there are quite a lot of questions that have built up, I'd like to welcome to the stage Chris Nicholls.
Hello.
Hello. So I'm going to tell you off again, Chris, for underselling yourself. When I watched that video a couple of days ago, I was like thinking, he's done it again. You underestimate the impact that you have on the people that you work with on a day-to-day, conversation by conversation basis. But I do know the people that you've worked with value your input and your coaching immensely, and I've spoken to them on an individual basis because they're on my program, and every single person has benefited from how you've approached coaching and how you've tried to bring that whole professional element into our schools. So thank you for that, and you need to stop doing that, Chris. That's me telling you off.
Well, thank you. I guess I mentioned the issue about sort of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. Certainly, suffered from imposter syndrome. The first year or so when I was the principal of the college, I kept wondering when somebody was going to find me out and realize that, you know, I couldn't really do the job. So it's just the way we are. There are strengths and weaknesses with every personal characteristic. And I would argue that, you know, sometimes humility is good, but I recognize what you're saying.
Yeah.
I've had lots of questions. I haven't really been able to keep up quite with all of them. But I've noted down a number that I thought were really good and like to address. Shall I do that?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and in no particular order. But Harriet asked a question about the impact of coaching on well-being, and that's a good point, which I didn't make in the presentation. The focus was really on how you can improve performance in the school or college. But you know, you don't need to work with people very long to realize that, you know, a major impact on performance is what's going on in their home life, and it does come up a lot in coaching. Recently, the issue of lockdown and school closure has had an impact on the discussion, and yeah, you go where the conversation needs to go. This is a really important fundamental factor in coaching. It makes it different from those other areas of support, that it's their agenda, it's not yours. You may have this view that this is what they should do or this is what they shouldn't be doing, but you listen, you help them to reflect back. They reach conclusions about what they need to do in terms of their time management or whatever, and it happens automatically. That's the magic of it. It is amazing actually what people discover for themselves and say, I never thought of that. And then you say, well, I didn't tell you that anyway. You worked it out for yourself. Yeah. There is a kind of magic to it. So yes, Harriet, absolutely. It's a fundamental part, I think, of supporting people in their well-being and helping them to manage better what they're doing.
Where should we jump to next, Chris?
Well, Maureen has asked a question, and Arv, you know, this is one that I kind of engage with personally from time to time. It's about context. Do you need to be, putting it bluntly, you know, putting it sort of really simply, if you are going to coach a Black lady, do you need to be a Black lady? You know, that would be the most kind of, you know, blunt kind of approach to it. And the answer is no, you don't. You know, I've discovered that for myself. But you do need some kind of context. So technically speaking, anybody can coach. You can learn the skills, you can do a qualification. So, you know, a 23-year-old person with no experience of education could do a coaching qualification, then say, right, now I can coach head teachers, or I can coach BAME staff in middle leadership. I honestly think it will be very difficult. I think it would be difficult for the clients, people being coached, to kind of feel, you know, enough empathy and feel that person understood their context. So it's not a very clear answer, this. I would say you need some context, but you don't by any means need an exact match from my experience.
Yeah, I mean,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's why I said in the intro at the beginning that lived experience in terms of from your personal journey on this, your lived experience has given you that context. Being the head of one of the largest sixth form colleges in one of the most diverse areas in the UK, where you're dealing with students and staff from lots of different heritages, does give you that context, and your school improvement work and the fact that you have worked in different cultures as well. Those things add that. And like you said, coaching is more about the questions that you're asking. And if you've got the lived experience, then you definitely are more likely to, if you want to do positive coaching, more likely to ask the right questions that get people to reflect in the way that they need to. But like you said, it comes from the person. So as long as you follow that remit, it comes from the person.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it's a skill, coaching. It's a skill of questioning, and as I hope I made clear in the presentation, it's you know, there's a lot about it that's counterintuitive, and so the idea that you can just oh, well, let's ask a few questions and we'll be doing coaching. And I want to pick up something. It's something you said right at the beginning, actually, Arv, and it's something that you hear often said, and I used to say it. We have a culture of coaching here. We have a culture of coaching. It's a nice, it's a nice kind of thing to be able to say. We all want to be able to say it. It's a bit of a trap there. You need to be careful. In a way, there isn't any, you don't really have a culture of coaching. You have, if you're doing it properly, people who are actually trained. The more I've looked at this, the more I've thought you can't just dabble with this and dip in and say, we do a bit of coaching. You don't do a bit of coaching. You either do it properly or you're doing something else. Great. You're supporting people in other ways. We do those, as I hope is clear in my presentation. But it's really important to understand coaching is something quite specific. And if you're introducing it in a school, it'll be a small number of people. And I can pick this up. One of the questions that was asked, I did answer it actually directly, was, can you sort of force people? Can you decide who's going to be coached? And absolutely not. So this idea that you will say, well, we're going to coach our whole senior leadership team, 20 people, or middle leadership team or whatever, isn't going to work. You have to choose a small number of people, and you have to do it properly with them. You have to put the time and the space. So we had some questions about finding space. Stephen and Ishraq asked about creating opportunities in school. You really do need to plan it. It's a bit like doing performance management properly. Some places don't do it properly, but and many of the people listening will know that when you do it properly, you have to really organize. You have to make time and space for people to have those one-to-one meetings where they'll not be interrupted and they'll have plenty of time to do it. And it's stuck in the timetable. And if another crisis happens, you don't send a note and saying, sorry, you can't do your coaching session today. You've got a duty, etc. You really have to protect it. And because it's expensive, you're likely to only be doing coaching with a few people. Another question related to that came up was about how many sessions do you need? Now, I've done 2 sessions, and I'll be honest, I'm surprised at the impact that 2 sessions has had. But ideally, I would say you'd want to do 4, 5, 6, something like that. But I've discovered that 2 sessions can be quite impactful, but ideally you'd want to do more.
Yeah, and I think it was quite good to hear the 3 people that were in the video saying that actually you had the coaching, but making sure that the follow-up was there, which they said that was the thing that really reminded them that this is the process that they need to go through themselves, and they need to monitor that and self-monitor what they're doing, and looking at whether it's having the impact that it needs to have, and reflecting on what they need to do on a regular basis. So the ownership is with them. It was very clear, but you were there to make sure that they knew the ownership was with them, by follow-up emails, by calls, whatever that might be after the sessions. And I think they're the things that made the difference.
The ownership is critical. And it's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why I would strongly advocate that coaching should be done by somebody from outside of your organization, because you will have an agenda inevitably. I just really don't think you could coach somebody that you have line management responsibility for, because you will have an agenda. As a senior team member, you'll have an agenda. You will want that person to do something, to achieve something, and it will be very difficult not to bring that in. But the other issue is confidentiality. Coaching is fundamentally about moving forward. There was a slide with a guy walking forward on a road. That's a fundamental principle. It's not moaning club. It's not, everyone's against me, nobody loves me, nobody cares. These are all the things that have gone wrong. Actually, I've experienced very, very little of that. You do sometimes look backwards briefly in order to be able to look forwards. So what did you learn from that is a common question, and how will you use it? That's a really powerful part of coaching. But inevitably, when you're asking people, well, what are the barriers to you moving forward? Sometimes those barriers will be institutional barriers in the school or the college. Yeah. And they might even be individuals. So then, the discussions, well, how are you going to get around this? How are you going to move forward in a positive way? Now, it will be very difficult to have that conversation, I think, in the organisation, you know, with somebody else who works in that organisation in a senior role. So I think, you know, get people from outside, from another organisation. As I say, where you've got a trust, that's an ideal opportunity for people to coach other people. But I just keep coming back, they must be trained. They must be trained as coaches, you know, really avoid the temptation to think that you can dabble with it.
Absolutely. Can we jump to Lauren's question?
Yeah.
Because I know that this is something that you've had to deal with, and I think it's probably a common thing within coaching that it's a confidence side. And how do you work with that? So Lauren's asked, I did try a lot with a trainee, mentored most and teaching, etc. He never wanted to think of his own idea. How do you get around the lack of confidence?
Yeah, and coaching fundamentally is to a large extent about building confidence. That comes up so much. The idea of limiting beliefs, the inner person. Somebody asked me to recommend a book, and I can't remember who it was, but I recommended a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, because it's all about that inner voice that keeps telling you, no, that won't, you can't do that. You've tried it before. You know, all of that constant dialogue that is kind of running you down, you know, related to the imposter syndrome and so on. And so confidence is really important. And when you're dealing with somebody who's just starting out, in this case, that is likely to be an issue. I guess the couple of things I'd say on that question, I noted Lauren's question. You might need to be careful about whether the person is suitable for coaching. You know, I've said this point before, and I can't overemphasize it really. You can't decide this person needs coaching. Oh yeah, that's what he needs, a bit of coaching. That won't work. You know, you can tell people what coaching is, and then you can then invite them to put themselves forward for it, but you can't impose it. So going back to this question of Lauren's, you know, it may be that the time isn't right for coaching at that point. Maybe it's more about the mentoring, really, you know, supporting them through those early stages. If they can't even frame the answer to the question, you know, then they're not quite ready. However, I would say that, you know, a general principle in coaching, an idea is you say, well, look at somebody. I do this a lot. I say, look at somebody else in your school that is doing what you'd like to do, and they can usually identify somebody. I say, who would you like to be? Who would you most like to be? And then they talk about somebody, and you ask them, well, what can they do that you can't do? What's the gap? So you talk about gaps. And then when you've identified the gaps, then you're moving on to well, what things could you do in the next few months to move yourself more in the direction of this person? That works pretty well, actually. I haven't found anybody who can't think of somebody that they admire in some way, you know, and want to move towards. So going back to Lauren's question, I'd be surprised if you speak to somebody really right at the early stages, this trainee, that they can't see some things that they'd like to emulate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope that
I was going to say, and also how you introduce it and doing it explicitly, in terms of, like you're saying, actually saying what coaching is and where who leads it. And actually saying that at the beginning, then you'll know whether you've got the buy-in, rather than like you're saying whether coaching is needed or whether something more prescriptive is needed in terms of, especially with the trainee, you may need other types of support and guidance rather than coaching at that stage. So you'll know that from the beginning, but have that conversation what coaching is.
And that takes to a question by Lucia, who is talking about that idea of the extent to which you can blend coaching with other types of support. So if you're working with someone and you're thinking, you know, they need a range of support, I would say probably not, because it's just going to be too difficult. Going back to the earlier point in my presentation, which I know I laboured a bit because I think it's critical that you distinguish, this is coaching, this isn't. Now, I've tried this myself. We used to do it at the college. We used to talk about blending, and I think I was fooling myself, really. I've realised that afterwards. You know, I think what we were doing was useful in terms of leadership support, but it wasn't really ever. We might by accident have asked a good coaching question, I realise now, but not by design. So I think you need to keep the things separate. And I think if you're talking about someone that you're line managing, just to repeat my point, I think you need to kind of contract that out to somebody else and say, well, you know, this is coaching, we're doing mentoring. You might find coaching helpful. Would you like me to find you somebody to coach you? And that will, you know, ideally be somebody from another school, and you can do reciprocal arrangements. That's what I would suggest. And I know that seems sort of finicky, and you think, well, does it really need to be? Do we need to go to all this effort to make this time and space and separate out conversations and bring in? And I would say bluntly, yes. Yeah, if you really want to do coaching and you really want to have that impact, then you need to go to all that trouble to make it happen, and it will be worth it.
I mean, I looked at this, and in terms of the time, and we were talking about the time that we have within schools, and actually some of it comes from how schools actually set up, especially with trainees. You have an NQT mentor, and you have the people within the department that are helping you. Actually, it needs to be the other way around. The person that's outside the department needs to be your coach. And all the mentoring and all the guidance and all the support and the development needs to be done by the people within the departments. Actually placing your coach outside the department instead of having a mentor outside the department. So you're not actually taking up any more time, but you're redefining the roles and giving it that clarity. That might be a model that could also be used, especially with NQTs. I don't know.
Well, I mean, yeah, sorry to disagree with you, but I'm okay. Going to just keep pushing my point. I really think the coach needs to be from another organisation.
Okay.
You know, external.
Well, no, yeah, whether it's external, all I'm saying is it shouldn't be within the department.
Yeah. No, certainly not.
And quite often it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Try and define it. What I meant by outside is normally your NQT mentors or are normally from the college or from the accrediting body that's doing it, so that they're normally outside your actual school. And actually you need the coaches there or supplied by them, but your home school setting should be doing all the development work for you as a teacher, in terms of just a use of time. So where do you want to jump to next, Chris?
Rebecca asked a question about how you might use targets and how you might map those. And I suppose, if I'm honest, I'm thinking that doesn't sound like coaching. That might be, with no disrespect to Rebecca, it sounds as if that's the manager saying, how can I use coaching to bring this person forward in the way that I want them to have targets to achieve them. And you know, that is the great temptation as a manager, that's what you want to do. And I just keep coming back, labouring the point that coaching is something different from that and outside of that. And you do not have an agenda. You must not have an agenda, which is why for someone outside of the organisation, it's so easy, because of course you don't have an agenda. You want to support that person. You're working with them. You want to see them grow. And you know how to help them through questioning, but you don't have any sense of what you want them to do in their organisation that they're working for. You have no agenda. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, Rebecca, but I think the question implied that perhaps you might have been asking about something different. You don't set them targets, they set their own. And the powerful thing, and I think this came through from the clips that we listened to, is how accountable people feel for the targets that they set themselves in a coaching session. I found that quite extraordinary, honestly, quite a revelation, and really different from all those years of performance management where you're setting people targets, and you notice that they don't remember them. You know, nobody remembers their own performance. Well, you probably do, Alf, but most people don't remember the performance management targets that came from their own professional development meeting. And I understand why, and the psychologists can tell you why. And it's just about how, you know, the level of ownership and the targets that people set themselves in coaching goes a lot deeper, really do.
Yeah. And I think that's why it makes it quite distinct what the coaching element is, and like performance management in itself, because there will be whole school objectives that everybody needs to meet, which can be difficult to take ownership of if, like you're saying, they've been set for you, because quite rightly, within a school setting, you need to have a whole school approach to certain things. So again, they're distinct, and that's why coaching, I think, like you're saying, it's that whole ownership, and that's got to be the starting point. Where do you want to jump to next, Chris?
Meng Qiang
asked
a question about the distinction between mentoring, facilitating, and coaching.
Yeah.
I hope I've answered that, really. I hope my first few slides. Incidentally, a few people asked about the slides and the handouts. This session is recording, and it will be available. I don't know how long for into the future of, but certainly in the near future, it'll be easy to access and have a look again at the slides that I used. There's no handout separate from that. But going back to Meng Qiang's question, I hope that I managed to illustrate that, and perhaps those looking back at those early slides will help. And just to repeat myself, I do repeat myself, I'm afraid, it's worth just keep reminding yourself, and don't blur the edges, and don't say, well, we're doing a bit of this and a bit of that, and we're putting it all in together. You know, you have to be very precise about it, really, I think.
And I think it also goes back to, like you're saying, having a small group of people that have been trained and developed as coaches. And I think that helps that person then to, so if you were looking at doing that and you've been trained as a coach, then it helps you keep those barriers or those lines a little bit clearer in terms of what your role is in the process. And I think when we dabble, like you said, we go between them.
Yeah.
So I just want to remind. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that something that has occurred to me, and this won't surprise many people listening, but as I've talked to quite a number of people about their professional development, it's just reminded me again of something that I guess I've always known, is that we just don't make enough time and space for professional development, you know, and that's not the fault of school leaders. Actually, it's you know, let's not do politics, but it's the fault of the pressures on education systems, not just here, but you know, most areas of the world. I think teachers feel that they haven't really got time to do it properly, and I guess all I would say is, you know, it's just a reminder to keep that high in our thinking, to never cut professional development and think that's icing on the cake. It's a nice to have. We can manage without that. Our budgets are cut. Let's take that away. It would be a tempting thing to do, but it's never the icing on the cake. It's absolutely fundamental. And in my experience of coaching, I've experienced that really. You will you absolutely get your money's worth, I believe, for you know, spending on professional development and spending on coaching in particular as well.
One of the things I think somebody asked, and I don't know if you've touched it or not, especially with the current situation where we're not not able to be physically close to somebody, has that changed the nature and how you've delivered coaching, or what impact has that had?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Interestingly, I had for the second coaching session back in February, I'd mentioned to people that I was planning to do use an online system to do the second coaching system. This was before lockdown or school closure or anything, and that was really just to kind of, you know, save the time, all the traveling time. But I'd had a little bit of experience of it, and I knew that it worked. I'd found out it worked. That was at the beginning of the year. So all of the coaching sessions I've done now for the past few months have been, you know, online using Zoom, and it works. I think it works really well. I think we're all used to this now, aren't we?
Yeah.
You know, those of us who haven't done much before, and we're perhaps a bit skeptical about whether you could establish, you know, genuine rapport when you're not in the same room as someone. I would say absolutely you can. I haven't. I don't feel, and I guess you need to speak to clients to get their perspective, but I don't feel that it's compromised the quality of the coaching at all.
Yeah,
which is a good, a really good lesson for going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can vouch for that. I mean, the 20 plus people that that you're engaged with, that I'm involved in as well. It's just been a fluid thing in terms of whether it's a phone call, whether it's by email, whether it's in person, whether it's using conferencing, virtual conferencing. Like you're saying, it's about how you approach the coaching, is the questions that you're asking, and the person taking ownership. And I think the platform actually now has started to feel a little bit less relevant. We placed a lot of importance, I think, on traveling between sites and meeting people, and I think sometimes that's not always it doesn't give you the advantage that you think it needs, that it does give you. So
I know. I've spent quite a lot of time stuck in Luton rush hour traffic, and we'll all have, whichever part of the world we're in, we'll have faced that, that just dead loss of time. So it's good to kind of escape from that.
absolutely.
There were a couple of questions asked that I noticed in the list around peer-to-peer coaching.
Yes.
And I suppose, I guess that's a question about whether you can coach somebody that you know. If you've got two people who are working at the same level in an organization or friends, could you coach each other? I would say absolutely. I can't see any reason why not. Again, subject to the proviso that I keep coming back to about ensuring that you are trained as a coach, and that you understand the principles, you know what you're doing. And I'm just going to say this again, because, going back to earlier, but I'm not an expert. What I'm sharing today is the knowledge that coaching works. That's what I'm telling you. Coaching works. So it's worth having a look at. It really is. It's worth investing in. That's all I know. I'm not setting myself as an expert coach, but I know enough to know that it really works. So yeah, peer-to-peer coaching, absolutely, why not? You'll definitely learn something. You can even coach yourself, actually. You can ask the set of questions when you're training as a coach. One of the things they do is to make you do some self-coaching, and to see what you can find out that you didn't know before, at the start of the process. It's nothing like as powerful as being coached by somebody else, but it does work. The questioning process does just make you go into a different, mindset, really. It does dig things out that you didn't know were there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just on that, in terms of the trained part and and getting the knowledge base, a few people had asked about what is actually the qualification that you can get as a coach.
Yeah, and I'd sort of decided that I've answered a few people, sort of privately on this one.
Yeah.
And I think there's no reason why I can't say I am doing a diploma with the Coaching Academy, which is they say about themselves that they're the oldest, and they say they're the largest. I don't know whether either of those are true. I decided that it would be wrong of me to make some kind of qualitative statement about them here with this large audience. All I would say is that, they are one of a number of providers, and I'm not going to make a recommendation. I'm just going to recommend that you do a formal qualification if you're going to do coaching, or that you employ somebody, if you're getting someone to coach, that is actually ideally qualified, or at least working towards, is really all I'll say on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes isn't even a question that we ask, to be fair. You might get a coach. We don't actually ask about their credentials in terms of their how can they qualify being a coach, and it's a simple question, and I think that's important. I mean, coming out of this session, I think that's important. I
think if it's not a regulated profession, so these qualifications have no. I mean, there is some moderation and quality control, of course, but it's not a nationally regulated. I think I would always ask about I would get testimonials, and a track record. Who have you coached and when? I wouldn't, rather than the qualification. It's just all about what your experience is. before you would employ somebody as a coach, I think.
I think we're actually at the end of our session, Chris.
Well, I've enjoyed it.
The time flies, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
When the video first stopped, I thought we've got like loads of time to go through these questions, but I think we've hit quite a lot of the questions, and I think people, when they re-watch this tomorrow on the YouTube channel, it may actually answer some of the questions that they have asked, because there's a lot about just clarification. I think there's always going to be a question, the difference between mentoring and coaching. But,
well, can I just apologise to all the people who will have asked good questions that I haven't got round to? I can see I've got 46 showing here, 47 now. Some of those I know will be really good questions that I couldn't get to. I'm not yet skilled enough in this process of juggling questions appearing on the bottom of the screen and talking in a semi-sensible way at the same time.
Yeah, no. To be fair, we rarely get through all of the questions because there is so much.
Yeah.
And I do want to thank everybody for asking those questions. I mean, that in itself, take your questions and try and explore those with relation to coaching yourself. Lots of information, as Chris said, is available online. Try and find yourself a credible source that you can rely on and get the information that you need. And I'm sure that we'll be sharing more of Chris's details as he shares them with us, if you need to know more. So thank you, Chris, for your time putting this together.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
We look forward to seeing you in the future. So that's the end of another session on #LDeduchat, leadership development in education online. We never have enough time. We never, ever have enough time to explore the topics that we're doing, but we just want to make you hungry for the things that you find interesting, for you to go ahead and find out more information. The hour slot is never going to be enough. So please do explore coaching and actually how you can actually embed that as a practice when needed, in the proper way, as Chris said, and then he's corrected me as well a few times. But do make sure you have a look at that, because the power of coaching is immense, and I've seen it firsthand for myself personally and also the people that I work with. So I want to thank you for engaging, and I want to thank Chris for putting this together for us. As I said, go over onto Twitter at Chiltern TSA. Make sure you follow us. There's lots of information coming out to do with this and all our other sessions, but more specifically about our session that's coming up tomorrow. We've got Black Lives Matter and anti-racism, a whole school responsibility, and we've got a panel of especially invited guests who'll be looking at two broad strands on leadership and curriculum. Do go on to the direct Zoom link and register well in advance of that session, and make sure you hook into that session tomorrow before 11:30, as soon as we open the e-doors, which normally happens 10 minutes beforehand. As you know, we will try and do that as early as possible so you can get yourselves logged in and ready for that session. Please, please, please be present tomorrow. It's an important day tomorrow for us, because we really need to talk about this now. So without further ado, I am now going to sign off for another session of #LDeduchat, and I really, really look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you.